Yay! Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Right. Sorry about that. I'm working on the lighting situation, but it'll be a bit. I need to get a ring light.
Oh, I've heard good things about those.
Okay.
Yeah, lots of hair. I've Oh, hey, Dan. Good
Hi,
to see you in
Dan.
the chat.
Can't
No,
hear
I went from like I don't remember what celebrity I compared my hair to last time, but now I'm just full on Tim Burton, I think.
Well, I could say something, but I have all the hair.
I'm sure you can hear me now, right, Dan? He's telling me that he couldn't hear me, so it should be working now.
I can turn on the.
OBS has this
I can.
annoying tendency to completely reset my my settings um, on my microphone every single time I start it up, and then I always forget, and so it defaults to no sound as opposed to defaulting to whatever microphone happens to be hooked up. So I always end up. It seems like every episode lately, we start the stream and somebody's like, "Hey, we can't hear Jeff at all. You're just not there." Dang it! Every time I gotta just start remembering. But all right. Oh, I have to check something real quick. It occurs to me. Uh-huh. We're talking about a book with Dan here in watching the stream, and Dan was one of the rules developers on the book, so we have to be extra mean.
Get
I think
him!
that's how that works, right?
It's the get him,
That's right.
moment.
That's right.
Yeah.
And he can't defend himself. All he can do is scream impotently at his chat room.
Unless we have like a call-in segment, and he can call in
We
really
do have
angrily about that.
a voicemail that has almost never gotten used.
I kept meaning to use it too. Like just especially after I moved from North Carolina, I kept meaning to like call in and just harass you a little bit on the voicemail.
Part of the original idea was that people could call in and be like, "Hey, you're talking about this book on an upcoming episode. Let me give you my 30-second take," and then I could just drop those into the episodes in editing. But then nobody ever really used it that way, and then it just stopped getting used altogether. And I'm just like, you know what? I'm not gonna fight the flow of the current on this. I'm just gonna if nobody's using it, that's fine. I'm not gonna make a thing of it. Dan says we can do our worst. It certainly won't be worse than what he gets for Unearthed Arcana stuff. People understand what the purpose of Unearthed Arcana is, right? Like it.
So I worked professionally as a game
You did,
tester
yes.
in the video game industry, and
It's a
there is
elegant.
no phrase in all the world that makes me want to murder people more than "Did they even test
Right.
this?" Oh,
Oh, there we are. Anyway, oh, I just had my script up in front of me and then I moved it. I've got my script. We are streaming. There's at least one person watching us. Um, so let's
I
let's
see
get doing it.
5.
If you all are ready. Good.
I'm ready. Yeah.
All
Yes.
right. I'll hit record on the audio. All right. This episode of the Tome Show is brought to you by Skull Splitter Dice and listeners like you. Thanks for using the Tomes, Amazon, and DM's Guild affiliate links. And thank you to our patrons from patreon.com/the Tome Show who support us directly. Welcome to the Tome, a D&D news, reviews, and interviews show, and I'm your Tome host, Jeff Greiner. And in this new type of episode that we're calling Surprise Round, because I came up with the name about 30 minutes ago, we'll be throwing mythological lightning at the Mythic Odysseys of Theros. We have our chosen champions of the gods here to give us an early take on this new book, and I'll talk about what this new kind of episode is all about in a moment. First off, we have the man from the basics of the game, from the monstrous ecologist, from my own dreams, Jeremiah McCoy. Welcome back.
Hi. I thought I changed it up.
And secondly, we have the man who slayed the infinite heads of the internet, our own social media manager, and the hero we need right now, Ismail Alvarez.
Glad to be here as
I
usual.
like to have fun with intros. Okay, so in this episode, we are discussing the Mythic Odysseys of Theros, the latest book from Wizards of the Coast, and the second book wherein they have converted a Magic the Gathering setting into a D&D setting, the first one being Ravnica. Publication of the print version was delayed due to pandemic-related issues, but the digital version came out last week, and we've taken a gander and plan to give you our first impressions of the episode. That's sort of the idea behind this new format for an episode that we're experimenting with. The idea is that we're going to try to do these surprise round episodes, or at least we're going to test it out a few times, very, very quickly after a book comes out. I'm going to try to get it within like a week of release, that we record sort of our first impressions. So you probably have to understand we haven't done a super deep and thorough read of the book yet. We definitely probably haven't played the things from the book yet. But doing it this way, we can get a very first quick impression so people can get some quick ideas about what's in this book and whether or not it might be of interest. And then we can sort of take our time. We can take a few months. We can make sure people have a chance to really play with it and test it and poke and prod it and see where the cracks are. And then several months later, we can sort of do our deep, more meaningful review. As opposed to what we've been doing for the last decade or so, which is sort of an in-between, where we wanted to get it out quick, but not so quick that we haven't done an in-depth look at it. This way, I'm hoping that when we do the deep, meaningful review, we can have more people on to review it that have played with it more and have that experience and have found those areas that we may otherwise have missed from just doing a deep read. So if this becomes normal, every big WotC product will have 2 episodes, one focused on our first impressions and a later one several months later with a deep analysis of those experiences. I'm curious to see how people like it. It's something I've been thinking about for a while, and then it came up on our Discord channel and we talked about it a few weeks ago, and I thought, let's give it a shot and see how it goes. You guys good with that?
Sure.
Absolutely.
So I'll be curious to see how it goes. I have no like normally when we do a review, it goes a good hour or so, give or take. Given that we haven't necessarily had the depth of analysis at this point, I'll be interested in sort of seeing how long it takes us. Right? I may not have as much to say given that I haven't deeply read the setting section of this book, for example, at this point. So we'll see. I'll be curious to see. Then again, we all like to talk, and so that goes parcel with podcasting, right? So maybe we'll fill the time. But
You could ask me about something geeky, and I'll talk for hours if you want me
no,
to.
absolutely. There are people. One of the things I've always said, I discovered early on in my podcasting time that one of my favorite interviews is Ed Greenwood, because I could come up with 3 questions and he will talk for hours. Like, this is a man who knows how to tell a story and likes to go on and on doing so. So there are people who can do that, and I think in the geek community especially so.
Sure.
Before we dive further into our discussion of the book, though, I want to thank our sponsor, Skull Splitter Dice. If you can get to them through at skullsplitterdice.com/tomeshow, I think is the link. That gets you access to our landing page, and there's a coupon code there. They make some great dice of all sorts, including metal dice that are my favorite metal dice. And what's more, their current sponsorship is actually sponsoring a series of contests. They're giving me hundreds and hundreds of dollars worth of their products to give away in 4 contests, 1 per month. And I'm like, hey, I'm on board with this, because then I get to share the love with the listeners instead of just take sponsorships to help pay bills and whatever. So this month, it is June. The contest is Twitter focused, so make sure you're following The Tome Show. It is at The Tome Show, and find details there about how to enter the contest. Next month, I'm currently thinking it's going to be Facebook based, so make sure you're following The Tome Show on Facebook for details about that as well. Along with that, there are links to all of the fantastic products that they're offering. There's a set of metal dice, there's a bundle, there's a dice tray from their new dice tray sets. There's a bunch of stuff. They've got like 3 or 4 different one of their nice metal cases. There's a whole bunch of stuff in this one bundle just for this month, so people should definitely check that out. Okay, let's get to what this episode is about. Right, the Mythic Odysseys of Theros. In an effort of full disclosure, I am I think it's called an insider, a D&D Beyond insider, so I did not pay for the book. I got a free copy that way, and I want to just check to make sure people has an opportunity to find out where they're at there. Is anybody else working from review copies?
No, I went ahead and announced it.
Nice.
Likewise, I did the same.
Okay, good. I'm going to make some editing work for Sam here. Because somebody in the chat wanted a link about the contest, so I'm copying and pasting it and put it real quick.
Okay.
There it is. Okay, so let's talk about the Mythic Odysseys of Theros.
If I could...
Oh, what'd you say?
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I might be coming in a little funky. I think I'm having some trouble with my connection. Real quick, though, I did want to mention that this is the first book that was offered at a discount if you pre-ordered the book at your local gaming store. And I thought that was really neat. Something that they haven't seen and something that people have been asking for a long time. I just figured that merited mentioning.
That's absolutely. I mean, that is something that's been in discussions for a long time through several editions of, if I'm going to buy the book digitally or physically, how can I justify buying it multiple times on multiple formats, right?
Yeah. But the only thing on that made me sad is I had already pre-ordered it before on D&D Beyond before they announced it. So I was like, I could have gotten it for free. Sad. Oh well.
So Ish, is that how you got the book then? Is that you had pre-ordered it?
I did pre-order it through my local gaming store. It's not free. They give you a 50% discount code on the digital order, which is, it's something. It's as I mentioned, something that people have been asking for a long time. But yes, I pre-ordered the book, which got delayed in printing, as we all know, just due to all kinds of circumstances. But they offered to release it digitally on the original release date and then release the physical print much later. I think it's sometime in July, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that sounds right. Assuming that things continue on as planned. So you pre-ordered it. I want to understand how this process works. So you pre-ordered it from your local game store. They gave you a code then that you were able to use.
Correct.
Okay.
And then you just input the code when you buy the book, and then it takes the 50% off and so on. And 1 second, I need to.
Apparently, he's got to go take care of something.
Indeed.
So let's Ish is dealing with things. Let's talk about what this book is then. So we have this Magic the Gathering setting, and it is largely Greek mythology based. Jeremiah, you're more of my Magic friend, right? So maybe you know more.
So Magic, this is the setting. I think they came out with it in 2013 originally, and it is the setting that the sort of iconic Magic character Gideon Jura is from, and it was a pretty popular setting, and then they moved into they cycle through settings, and recently came back again, and it each of the gods, which isn't made clear in the text here, obviously, because they try and lean away from the way Magic is structured, but each of the gods tie to different colors of mana in Magic, and some tie to 2, and some more just represent the one color. The bigger, greater gods tend to be one color.
Okay.
And the lesser gods tend to be combined.
So what is it? The sun god, is that Helios? Helioid?
Yeah, Helios
would be the white then.
Yeah, he would be the white mana, and the smith is red. Erebus, the death god, is black.
And so whether this is good or bad, I don't know. But I did not find myself going through this book and thinking about the mana color connections between those things and Magic. When I read the Ravnica book, I absolutely did. Like, I looked at those factions, those guilds, and said, "Oh, well, this is those color combinations. That's that color combinations." I didn't think about that at all with this.
I don't think I have either in my read through. Admittedly, I haven't given a deep dive, but my look at it was not in that structure. But I was thinking about it today, and both Ravnica and this do something that maybe some of the other settings that evolved sort of organically don't, in that the gods fit within a structure because it starts from there that is less haphazard than, say, a Forgotten Realms or Dragonlance or something like that. This feels much more like there is an underlying structure to how everything fits together, and even if you're not seeing the colors, you can sort of, nothing seems like an outlier, if that makes sense. Like, Forgotten Realms is filled with outliers. It's like, well, why do we have a bunch of Egyptian gods for no apparent reason?
And I made reference to this before we started recording, and I know somebody who could give you that reason, and it would take 5 hours, and he would love to tell you all about it.
Sure. But yeah, and I know the backstory on that, right. But it is interesting to see that structure and how it manifests in a much more cohesive mythology that makes sense and fits together a little bit better than maybe some of the ones that evolved naturally.
Absolutely. No. And that's interesting. I looked at this product and I said, this book has a lot of really cool ideas for how to run a really specific type of god focused game, right? Like I can run a campaign here that has a very specific feel to it and do it very well, that I think is really engaging and interesting to me. And the magicness of it all never really occurred to me in the way it did when I looked at Ravnica. Like Ravnica felt like a magic world, whereas this is feels like an interesting world that is telling a specific type of story that I don't feel the magic in it, for better or for whether that's good or bad to people. I don't know, but it doesn't feel like a magic world to me. It feels
That's
definitely
fair.
Greek mythology to me, right? But it doesn't necessarily feel magic to me.
Well, and one of the things that I was going to bring up about this book is that it seems to give you something that maybe the older editions of D&D had. Like fifth edition really like took a right turn away from having settings be very deity centered. You don't even have to be worship a god to be a cleric of something. Unlike in previous editions, likewise paladins and so on. So I've noticed that in a lot of the fifth edition games that I've either run or been in, that the intervention of deities has been way lower. The kind of inclusion of what deities want, or their kind of maybe their cat's paws want, has been way lower. So this is almost kind of like, hey, do you want to have your gods back? Do you want to have like a game that is very deity focused? Here's the toolkit for that. This is what that would look like if you want to inject kind of that god focus back into your game.
Well, and at the same time, like you're right. I think, and it was very intentional. If you looked at the storyline, the novels of the Forgotten Realms, right? There was a very intentional effort made to sort of have the gods take sort of a back seat a little bit more, because they'd gone through from second edition through fourth edition, like the gods were walking around doing stuff on a fairly regular basis. So so they've taken a more of a backseat. They're a lot less involved. I don't I think you're right that this is a great toolkit for telling a very God focused story. I don't know that it's the kind of thing where I'm going to start peeling those bits out and putting them into my other established settings. Like if I did a Forgotten Realms campaign where I wanted the gods to be active, that's not, I don't think, how I would do it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But if you
I
wanted
guess
to have a campaign that was really like not just we're focused on one of the characters is sort of given a quest by the gods or whatever, and directly intervenes in things, which is more of how it tends to happen in the realms. But if you wanted to tell a very specific story of no, we're all working for the gods, whether we like it or not, and that's the theme of the whole story, in a very specific way. This is a toolkit that feels very interesting for doing that.
I feel like this is much more in a first edition treatment of gods in some regards, in the way that they're so hands-on. It feels like deities and demigods.
And I think, if I remember right from the from Dragon Talk, the official D&D podcast, I think they referenced that as being a source of inspiration several times in working on this book.
I have pointed out to some folks that if your jam is in fact Greek mythology, this is obviously going to be your setting. The gods have different names, but some of it is you file the numbers off and okay, that's Vulcan or Hephaestus.
I mean, there were instances where I'm looking through the setting information. I'm like, oh, okay, so this is Sparta, that's Athens, got it.
Right, and that's absolutely true, with the caveat of adding, it's more like the Disney version of Greek mythology than the actual version of Greek mythology, which often started with the phrase "Zeus got horny," um, and yeah, it's a lot less rapey. It's a little friendlier than actual Greek myth, but um, yeah, I dig that sort of hands-on gods thing. If you're going to do uh like a game where gods are definitively there and doing stuff, this is a good way to do it. I've always sort of I've been conflicted about how Forgotten Realms has done it because it keeps switching back and forth, and it's like, yeah, they're there, no, they're not, yes, they are. I mean, they exist, that their impact on the world exists, but uh, they could never make up their mind of whether or not they were going to be involved in the world directly or not. And now it's in a not state. And this is very much a, well, if you're going to have gods involved directly in the world, this is a good way to do it. Um, Even if I weren't running this game, I think there are some things I would take from it and play with.
No, I think there are absolutely some ideas here to peel out, but I think there's a lot. Like, one of the things that I like about what, or I think I'm going to like about what they've done here, that raises a lot of interest for me, is the way that everything is tied to this specific type of story that you're going to tell. That
Yeah.
you are a godly champion, like it or not. You know, you are Hercules of the world, and this is how you tell that kind of story, right? And everybody else in the party is Hercules as well, or other various champions and what have you. And there's all these, like, you can drill in, like the player options supports that, the new subclass options supports that, the races support that. But then, like, you dig into, there's sections on the kind of champions that are selected from each god, and the piety system, and how you can sort of raise and lower your score and your piety with a god, and the actual in-game mechanical benefits of having a high piety, the kind of adventures you would go on as this kind of champion, the inclusion of, what was it, the ordeals in there.
Right.
These other kinds of things that you would do as a hero, as a champion, are all part of it. Even the magic items and the monsters and all these other things are all sort of tied to this idea of, let's give people a really robust system of how to tell that specific type of story. Could I rip a few things off and shove them in other games? Absolutely. But there's a lot of things I feel like work really well together, and I'd like to just sort of keep them in their little cohesive bubble.
Yeah, I think one thing that you can take away from this in lessons and how to use systems to reinforce ideas. So there are plenty of settings where you are an adventurer in a world of adventurers. Forgotten Realms does this a lot. Greyhawk, Mystara, what have you. And then there are places where your PCs are supposed to be special. And in this setting, your PCs are supposed to be special. They are not just any, mercenary who goes around. You're tied to special destinies and fate, and you can tear yourself away from fate, or you can embrace those special destinies, and you can conflict with gods and so on. And does a lot to make the player feel special. The piety system's good at that. The supernatural gifts, like, everybody starts out, was like, I looked at that and I was like, these are all really interesting, and I want to make a dozen more, because the idea of just, here's something that makes your character special. Here you go.
Yeah, although some of, like, I look at those and that's part of the reason I hesitate to say I can just tear these out and put them in whatever game, right? Because
Sure.
This is a world where you're supposed to be more special than everybody else. The supernatural gifts, the piety score, they also all come with a power boost. Like, there's a mechanical benefit to all of these, and these characters are going to be a little bit more powerful than characters that aren't from this setting. And I think that's fine in a world where you're supposed to be super special. I think there are mechanical questions that I'll be interested to dig in more to in how does the balance hold up over time compared to other things.
I think one of and Ish, jump in if I'm talking over. I'm sorry.
No worries. I'll say something, but you say it first, or you
Okay.
say your thing first.
There is this notion that you should have your characters balance against all of the nebulous other characters in the world. And why? I mean, outside of Adventurers League, which obviously you kind of want to have everybody on the same field because they're playing through the same adventurers, and you don't want those adventurers to, play the same for everybody else. Adventurers League, sure. But anything else, any home game, why can't your characters be more powerful than everybody else of the same level? There's nothing that should stop you from doing that.
Sure, but and as somebody who's played in my campaigns, I think you're well aware that in my games they almost always are. The PCs are almost higher powered than they should be at their level. But I also know that there are people who will have a heavy concern about balance issues, and when you are presenting an option that makes the players more powerful, that doesn't necessarily, then it changes the encounter development math, the monster math, all that sort of comes into conflict, and there's many people that are a lot worried about that. I don't tend to be one of them, because I never bothered with the math of developing my encounters anyway, but I don't know that I'm the person who needs to hear this message that there is a power boost happening, and there's not really a cost to getting that power boost other than a role-playing cost, which is not necessarily a mechanical cost.
Yeah, it's and I think changing up your monster math is certainly something that you need to think about when you're putting this together, but it's not so bad.
None of these characters are.
Yeah,
it's not second edition Dark Sun, significantly powerful, than more compared to people of other
right.
worlds. But it's a reason that I think Steal Your Mind in the chat room pointed this out. It's one of those things where I would want it to be an all party thing or not, right? Everybody needs to be in on this system or not, because that one person that's in it and nobody else is gonna get a little bit of a bump that nobody else is getting.
Yeah, and I think I think one of the elements that should be discussed when you're looking at that is, what powers are they actually getting? Most of the supernatural gifts really kind of reflect racial abilities. So you're basically picking up a second racial ability. Like, there's one that's kind of like the orc ability, where that if you get dropped down to 0, you don't go unconscious. Or there's one that actually makes you sort of like a warforged. Like, it's a bunch of stuff that reflects. It's like you're getting a second race option along with your standard.
Yeah.
Ish.
I was just gonna say, I think especially now most D&D games kind of favor a more heroic element, a more epic element. It's a very specific game, maybe a Birthright or maybe certain kinds of Greyhawk games where it's meant to be gritty, it's meant to be deadly, it's meant to be like you're interesting, but you're not special. You could die at any minute, and then you're just gonna have to bring in the next, schmuck that's gonna go schlep around the dungeons until it happens again. But I think what we've kind of come to in 5th edition is that, you can play those gritty games, but like it's definitely, just like we've veered away from deity-focused campaigns, we've kind of veered towards being a little bit more awesome in general. And one thing I was going to say earlier is that if I was going to take this specific kind of system for deities and what have you, and apply it to a setting, I wouldn't necessarily do it with Forgotten Realms, especially since, as you mentioned, it's definitely less deity centric in this edition. But it would be great for Dragonlance. I mean, depending on the era of that, of course, there are eras of Dragonlance where the deities are less involved. But like, I would totally run a Dragonlance game using this system to be like, okay, yeah, you're a knight of Takesis, or you worship Paladine, or what have you, and it would be a real good representation of like the real interesting and awesome larger than life figures, and it would help you actually be on par with so often in the novels without feeling like you're always following in their shadow.
I'm imagining Tasselhoff Burfoot, champion of Paladine. Right?
You could actually like use the piety system and tie it to the in Forgotten Realms to the what was the term in the Forgotten Realms that they had for the chosen? The chosen. You could use the piety system and the supernatural gifts to reflect them. Oh, okay, the gods have started choosing people again. This person's a chosen of so and so.
And in that case, like the chosen are. I would argue that the chosen should get even more of a power boost than what the supernatural gifts give, right? And so you use the system, you file off the serial numbers, and you throw in a few extra things here and there, and I think you can use it for a lot of different things. I think you can use the concept. Honestly, the piety system doesn't feel a lot different to me in some ways than the faction system, other than it comes with some sort of mechanical bump, right? And I think you could develop mechanical bumps within certain factions, and now you don't have to be a champion of a god. You can be a champion of a god, or or you can be a member of the Harpers or whatever, and they all sort of follow suit.
I think it does reinforce behavior. Like you get a reward for basically doing something that your god would like. So it is a way of guiding character behavior with benefits for following that guidance.
Absolutely. Okay, so I think there are things here though that are very easily portable into lots of different things, right? I one of the things I really like is that I like the idea of a game that sort of comes together, right? Like this book has a type of story to tell and presents you with a lot of the tools to tell that story, and that's one of the things I like about stuff like this. I like the idea of the game in a box. Only in this case, I've got D&D, and this is a campaign in a book, right? And I like that it's cohesive and it's tied together well, and it's all of that. That said, there are parts that I think are very easily like I can take all of these racial options and stick them in places, right? I can allow anybody pretty much anywhere to play a centaur or a leonin or a minotaur or a satyr or whatever, right? And it's worth noting.
Probably not that guy, but that one guy. Probably.
And it's worth noting for people that those races plus Triton and human are the only ones in this setting, right? Human, centaur, leonin, minotaur, satyr, and Triton are the only playable races in Theros, right?
I thought there was an elf, but you're right.
And I found that the new subclasses, there's the College of Eloquence and the Oath of Glory Paladin. The first one is for the Bard. I felt like those could be very easily taken anywhere and playable. Like those subclasses felt a little more generic to the point that it could be very easily without even really doing much filing off of serial numbers, just work in other places. I was looking for like things in these subclasses that played off of the piety score or that kind of stuff, and they avoided that, and it helps create more portability. Jeremiah, you look like you have something to say.
Yeah. I was going to say that I think the Triton got updated a little. If I remember correctly, the last time they presented the Triton, it did not have dark vision. I think it does now. Yeah, it's got it now, and I don't think it did in the previous version. So that's a useful update if I'm remembering that correctly.
I think
No, go
it's
ahead.
oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I think it's a definite shift away from Volo's Guide, which I think is definitely an overall positive. But Volo's Guide was this kind of presentation of races as a take it or leave it. You know, these are weird options that you might find interesting. We're not going to make them balanced. I think they were really upfront about that. We're not going to make them balanced, but if you want to play them, here you go. That's why you had a lot of the monster races that actually had racial ability score penalties and so on. Is being reintroduced, like goblins and Eberron, orcs and Eberron, so on and so forth. And of course, here you've got Tritons. They seem to be balancing them a little bit more better, not just so that they're odd choices, but balanced choices as well as interesting.
Okay. Yeah, I think. Can we talk about the subclasses for a moment? So, I tend to play talky characters. Yes, both of you, I think, have played run games where I am a player on occasion. I tend to play talky characters. It's just something I do. And part of that is just leaning into something I'm somewhat good at. You know, I have a decent voice, good timbre. I can maintain a conversation without, suddenly becoming super self-conscious about it a lot of the time. So, great. The College of Eloquence Bard is, oh, you want to play the talker? Here. We're going to turn that up to 11. It's one more. It's a bit louder. It is the most social, powerful subclass, probably. The fact that you at third level you make a charisma check, you can treat a D20 roll of 9 or lower as a 10. With all of the bonuses that you're going to get from being a bard anyway, that's basically saying, unless I'm trying to convince a god to start following me, if there's a skill check involved, I will probably get it eventually. And that's really powerful. So people, DMs who have this in your game, be aware that skill checks are not magic.
What?
You do not necessarily let them. Oh, I made the skill roll. Yes, but that does not mean that you suddenly change this person's, I don't know, sexual preference or or something. That is impossible.
On I think that the advice can go the other direction as well, because this is a subclass that is really focused on those social skills. If you're playing in a game where your DM doesn't care as much about that, you're never going to talk your way out of the fight, and you need to make sure you are a well sort of balanced, well built, effective combat machine. The College of Eloquence Bard isn't useless in those situations, right? It does have better inspiration than other bards, which is nice. Like the idea that I can give you inspiration and you just keep getting inspiration until you're successful at that role. At whatever role you failed, okay, that's unfortunate. That failed, but now you still have inspiration. You didn't lose it because you failed, and you can just sort of keep going. Like that's kind of sweet. And then what is it the later one, where then you can pass it on? Like I have the bardic inspiration, and then and then I use it, and then after I'm done using it, I can pass it on to another user, and it can just sort of get multiple uses that way. Like, it does some cool stuff with inspiration, but I don't know that that's enough for me to say this is a viable subclass in a game where the DM is not telling a story that's interested in your talking through things.
Yeah, if it's not social,
Right.
it's not going to be as powerful. But any game with like political intrigue and social maneuvering and all of that, this is the most powerful subclass in the game.
I mean, in those elements of the game, yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, that's I found that subclass on first blush to be more interesting to me than the paladin Oath of Glory subclass that which is really sort of tied thematically into this sort of heroism thing. Although I did read through the paladin Oath of Glory and think, oh, this would have been really good for one of my players when he made his character who wanted to go off and become, gain glory and fame and be a big deal hero and whatever. But it never really came out. It never really tied much into the story and whatever. But I think if there had been this sort of mechanical hook to reinforce it, it might have been a more integral part of who the character actually played as. So there's definitely a place where the Oath of Glory, I think, can shine and can reinforce a type of character concept.
And I almost wish that there had been kind of like a fighter equivalent to that, because I like tying it to a paladin almost is a little bit restricting in a story sense, because you want someone who's like, your Hercules type and goes off and kind of beats things up until the problem is solved, even if the problem wasn't beating things up. Like, that's kind of what I think of when I think of Hercules. But like the fact that it's tied to the paladin and everything that they do, it works thematically,
right.
And it's interesting. But I think there's like just that little disconnect where it's like it would have been, and this is just me being silly, but it would have been really cool as a fighter archetype. I thought like that was my thought looking through it. It's like, oh man, I really wish this was like a fighter thing.
And I think you kind of hinted at the exact thing that's on my mind there, though, is that I think you're right if I'm talking about a general sort of subclass concept, but if I'm thinking about a Theros subclass where it's all about the gods, it kind of makes sense here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, you mentioned Ish mentioned Hercules. This is Disney Hercules. This is the one who will pause and do a wink and a finger guns at his friends, and that's what the inspiring smite feels like to me. It's like, I just hit this guy, I'm gonna wink and finger guns at my friend, and they're gonna be more awesome.
Well, it's a little bit warlordy from 4th edition, right?
It is, yeah, it is.
And that's not the only time I went through this book and started drawing 4th edition comparisons.
Oh yeah, yeah.
If you missed the warlord, this is not unlike
it's
one.
It's not a warlord, but it's got some warlordiness to it, right? So.
Yeah, it's definitely close enough that you will miss it less.
There you go. Okay. Jeremiah, you wanted to talk about the subclasses, and we've talked about a lot of other things. And we've talked about piety and the section. There's a whole chapter that goes sort of through each of the gods and talks about who do they choose as champions and how do you use them and that kind of stuff. Is that also the chapter where... No, it's later on where they're talking about building campaigns, where there's also a whole chapter on... And now we're going to go through each of the gods again and tell you how they might be the patron of the heroes to build a campaign, or they might be the villain, and you can sort of mix and match that way. I thought was really well done. But to reinforce how much this is about telling stories about the gods, And generally, these specific gods, although you could file the numbers off and make things work, um, there's multiple chapters where it's like, okay, here's a chapter about this. Now let's do it god by god by god and go through each one of them and explain it to you and then how to do it, right?
Yep. And the it's the section I spent the least amount of time skimming because we were just doing the initial thing, the adventures side of it. But it what I did see was like, okay, yeah, that fits with the overall theme of the book. Uh, I'm going to say something about what I saw in there that I said about Ravnica. You have a magic setting, um, and there's very little acknowledgement of the overall metaverse of that setting. Like the characters that sort of exist in and out of the setting are they get mentioned, but they never really explain who they are or and how that you can actually pull some decent stories out of the magic meta setting and have it interface with this setting. Um, More so in Ravnica, where there was a whole war going on in Ravnica at the time they released it, and they just didn't mention it in the Ravnica book. But there's there's stuff going on that comes from outside, and they just sort of don't put it in.
Yeah, so as a non-magic player, I think that's part of why this works so much for me in terms of it doesn't have a lot of it doesn't feel like a magic setting to me. It just feels like an interesting kind of game to play, you know? Whereas
Sure.
Ravnica and I think they have to make the choice to either go whole hog into that or don't, right? In this case, they chose not to, and you're right. If you're looking for a lot of the meta story, a lot of the discussion of planeswalkers and all of that connected to Theros, so far as I can tell, it's not there. In Ravnica, it was more hinted at, but that's all you got was sort of a hint at it, which as somebody who doesn't know that lore and doesn't know a lot of that stuff, like that was just frustrating for me. Like it's like, okay, this sounds
Sure.
like a really cool thing. I wish you could tell me more about it, but I think because of the 5th edition conceit, their system of one book and done, it's hard to get into that, right? One of the things that meant there was probably way more product than there needed to be, but that I liked in I think it was mostly in 4th edition they did this, right? Is that there was usually like the setting and DM book, there was a player book full of player options, and then there was an adventure for a different setting. Like this is the kind of book where it's like I could get behind that, like a 3-book and then out. And a lot of times, like this book, Ravnica, a lot of the other ones, like they hold up as just one book. But I do kind of wish there was an adventure too.
Sure.
Like that's always what I'm looking for is an adventure, and they've worked really hard in this book to at least give me the inspirations to tell me how to build adventures. They did that in Ravnica as well, and that was my favorite part of the Ravnica book is them telling me how to tell stories in that world.
Yeah, and to be clear, and Dan and Dylan in the chat actually brought up there's only so much you can bring in. They wrote a book for D&D, and they couldn't really bring in like mana colors and stuff, and I agree. But it would have been nice to have like here's some NPC stats for a Johnny, who shows up in the setting. But because he's a planeswalker, they sort of skirt him. Like he's not he's only sort of there, and there are a number of like bad guys who show up in the setting as cards, which would have been interesting monsters to have. And we don't have those monsters. So that's a thing that that's the only thing I'm missing there. as a Magic player looking in, is like, there's some cool bad guys that I'd love to have some stats on.
No.
And
Now
we don't have that.
We do have a good number of
That's
monster
not
stats, and that was actually one of the other things I wanted to talk about in here. Now you talked about how you and I don't mean to cut you off or whatever or rush through things, but we are knocking on 10 minutes to an hour at this point. So for our quick look discussion. I did find the monsters interesting. I did find they tended to gravitate towards the ends, which oftentimes happens in the monsters. There's a decent number of lower level monsters. There's a decent number of higher level creatures. There's not a lot sort of in the middle range. There's a little bit, but not a ton. And that's where I need more stuff to chew on. But I also felt that was another area where I felt like they were taking a page from 4th edition. 4th edition had a tendency to say, here's a monster, and now here's like 5 different variants of a monster, you know? And they did that here as well.
Yeah.
Like, here's a Hydra. Now let me give you the 2 or 3 variants of a Hydra. You know, here's a whatever, and let me give you 2 or 3 different variants. And it's different than what they've done that in 5th edition, but they haven't done it like they did in 4th edition, and they do it quite a bit in this book, I found.
Yeah, I agree. Ish, what did you think of the monsters?
I mean, I really like the monsters. One thing that I had meant to bring up is that there's actually 2 other campaigns from third-party publishers that are focused on the Greek setting, and so I own both of them either in PDF or PDF and hardcover. Got really cool monsters there too, and I think there's like 3 different variations on like the Hecatonchi. Cool to see like kind of the gamut that runs. But I really like that this isn't just, hey, here's some Greek monsters. It's more like, here's Greek monsters in the context of Magic the Gathering, and like how you would sort of translate like the monster that is in this card to a monster that you would fight in D&D. And I think that's what a lot of people were looking for, what they did well. And I think you see the same thing. You either see these monsters that are like, you know, your little weak fodder that you have to bring out in the first couple of rounds until you can build up your big meaty monster that you then try and beat someone up with. But and I'm oversimplifying Magic the Gathering, but you get what I'm kind of going for. But no, I mean the representation I think is really good. There's I love monsters. There's a lot of potentiality for that here, but they kind of give you a swath rather than a bestiary, because of course they have to. If they were going to give you a bestiary, it would be the whole book, so on and so forth. I mean, I would hope that, like somebody in the chat mentioned Gilded Depths, I would hope somebody would be able to maybe flesh that out and give us the things that we didn't get, and maybe kind of fill in the gaps, because as cool as it would be to have like those mid-level monsters, like obviously they didn't fit, but like this is kind of a contained setting, so you kind of need those to make and you're just kind of filling in from the monster manual. And I didn't catch it, but did they have any section in the bestiary to say, hey, here's monsters that just automatically fit in from the monster manual, like unicorns and, you know, chimeras and so on and so forth? Did they make any mention of that? Because I didn't.
Yeah, that's a lot of what's in there is here are some classic monsters that are in the monster manual, and they list like the Basilisk and the Cataplebis and the Cyclops and whatever. And then with some of them, it's here's specifically some variants of monster manual monsters and how that could be used. And they also did, speaking of inspiration from previous editions, I also found the Nyxborn concept and the way it's applied here to be a little reminiscent of 3rd edition templates. Right? They have this Nyxborn template that you can be like, this isn't just a monster, but here's a monster that's Nyxborn, that was born of the heavens. Apply these extra traits, you know, and that's very much like the 3rd edition template era of doing things. So it's interesting to see, which I suppose gives those monsters a bit of a power boost without necessarily raising their CR, and so that balances out with the PCs that get those supernatural gifts, right?
I do think that the monsters that they do present do an excellent job of presenting this. These are monsters from myth. as opposed to like, yeah, we've got massacres over in the next county over. We just avoid that valley and it's fine. Like these are things cursed by the gods. They have a whole section of just mythic monsters that are named beings and so on. That felt really cool to me. Um, it leaned into the feel of the setting.
Okay. Yeah, no, absolutely, and I
Agreed.
liked the monster section a lot. Similarly, the magic item section, like it's all rare and above. There's no lower level magic items, but at the same time, they fit really well. It's got a whole thing about artifacts in there. I mentioned that it has this sort of like how to tell a story or build a campaign in this setting section, and then it gets into the second sort of part of that chapter. Like there's two chapters that, at least in the digital version, are both titled "Creating Theros Adventures." One of which is organized by the gods, and the other of which is like, here's how you do nautical adventures, here's how you do underworld adventures, and then here's a sample starter adventure that you can play that actually looks fairly interesting to me. And then we mentioned that there's a chapter that's sort of a gazetteer of the world. Now, Jeremiah, you mentioned that you didn't spend a lot of time looking at the how to build an adventure or the campaign sort of section. I actually spent a decent amount of time looking at that one, but I really did a fast skim on the setting section. So I'm curious, did you look a little bit more in depth at the setting? Because honestly, I was more interested in being able to tell a type of game than the specifics of the setting. Like in the realms, I care what the locations are because they matter. Whereas to me, the gods are the things that matter more here. So I focused on that. So tell me a little bit about the setting.
So, the fact that this is easily a mirror of ancient Greek myth, Greece, is not going to be a surprise to anyone. Akros is essentially Sparta, and it is it has a temple to Perforos, which is the sort of fiery creation god, god of passion. Uh, he has a whole bunch of flame speakers living there. An interesting setting. It's very harsh, sort of Sparta-like setting. Miletus is kind of like Athens. They even have a setting that is a city that is a mythological Atlantis.
Oh, okay.
That Heliod got angered at and sunk with his spear.
Like you do.
Olatin. Yeah. So like they, all of those classic mythological Greek cities sort of have mirrors here. The there is a sort of a more rural, that word just would not come out of my mouth. Rural section that is sort of farms and the like, and it's called Cetessa.
That's what that is.
Which one it was? The city states that all of these are around are called polises, and they vary in how they're ruled depending on which one. One thing that I did notice that a lot of people will be glad to see on a representation side, the founding of Miletus. The story is that there were two kings that were married to each other, and that is representation that certainly would not have happened in previous editions, I don't think. So I was pleased to see that. Yeah, the actual setting stuff is good. It gives lots of, like, here's a dangerous place, right. The Siren Sea. You can go do,
Now, tell me if my inclination, though, you think was a good inclination, that because it's so focused on a specific type of God-focused narrative, that the geography and the locations and the setting itself almost becomes secondary to focusing on your attention on the gods and those kinds of things. Is that impression that I have accurate, you think?
I don't think so from what I've seen. First off, different polises have very distinct feels. Like, and they say something about the gods that are sort of the sponsors of those places, for one thing. The geography is a reflection of the gods in the world.
Okay. So the setting and the locations matter because of their connections to the gods, and so that thread continues through all of it.
Yeah, and I think we didn't touch on it, but so gods in this setting are very much along the sort of second edition idea of gods and basic box sets. Gods get more power and sort of exist purely on the power of belief.
Right.
And previously there were the Titans, and then the gods came into being because the humans kept praying for deliverance from the Titans, and those prayers became the gods. And the gods want to continue existing, so they keep doing things that make people believe in them. So that means sometimes they shape the geography.
You'd think they'd be less petty then. Like if their existence involves people liking them, I guess they don't have to like them; they just have to believe in them, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. They just have to believe. They don't need to like them. Fear works too.
All right. Well, we are past the hour mark. We've come.
If I
I was going to ask for last thoughts, and Ish, you haven't had nearly as much time to talk, although your connection has been a little less stable too. But why don't you share any last thoughts you have?
Okay, I was just gonna say the gods of Theros seem like they're more like social media celebrities, like I don't know, your YouTubers and so on. I mean, they're not necessarily there to be nice to you, but they certainly get your attention. That's all I had to say about that. Take that with a grain of salt as you will. But for last thoughts, I'll be really brief. But it reminded me of 13th Age with the icons, and I thought it was a good way of kind of integrating like these kind of authoritative figures, but that are there to help you or to act as obstacles, but they weren't like the end all be all. You were their agents, you can interact with them, but they don't there's not a hard stop on the story because they either want you to stop doing something or they come in and solve it. It was a really good implementation of it.
Jeremiah, any last thoughts? I mean, you and I have had plenty of time to talk, but go ahead.
That's fair. Once you get me started, it's hard to get me to stop. I think this book does what any setting book should do. It makes me go, I can run a game in here, right? I look at all the things in there and I go, I know what I would run in this. And that is, they're doing the job there. The setting has some compelling conflicts. It makes the player characters seem interesting and powerful and important to the setting. And the artwork is excellent. I mean, there's just, it's a solid book. There's not much to complain about.
You make a good point. Like, I struggled with, and I don't mean to constantly compare it to Ravnica because they're two different things and they can stand alone on their own. But at the same time, I think it's natural because they're the two magic settings, right? When I looked at Ravnica, sure. I spent 2/3 of that book thinking, I don't know, this is interesting, but I don't know how to tell stories in this world until I got to the chapter that was like, here's how to tell stories in this world. And that one chapter fixed the whole book for me, right? In this book, I knew how to tell these stories on chapter 1. I was ready to go. and I knew the kind of stories I could tell and that I wanted to tell and how to put them together, and then they kept giving me more and more and more tools for telling those stories. Now, unlike some products where I will pick it up and I'm like, this is not something that is written in a way that is constructing a narrative in a way that I want to tell the story, and so I'm just not going to use it. This one I could totally see myself using, and it literally just comes down to, do I and my players decide at some point that this is the kind of story we want to tell? Because it seems really well designed to tell this type of story. And so if that's, if that sort of We're the Champions of the Gods is the type of story we want to tell, I'm going to pick this up and use it, right? If we never get around to being like, we want to tell that kind of, have that kind of campaign, then I will happily leave it on the shelf, and maybe, rip a few things out of it here and there when I need to, but otherwise leave it alone, right? And I think that's fine. I like the idea of a type of product that does what it does really well and isn't trying to do other things. And I think that's what we have in this book. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly made me wish I had more time for running games, because I could totally put together a game in this setting.
That's always true, though. I always want more time for running games. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and call that the end of this episode. I want to thank Skull Splitter Dice. You go to skullsplitterdice.com/tome show. And if that doesn't work, try skullsplitterdice.com/the-tome, because I can't remember exactly what the link is off the top of my head, because I'm dumb. And get a coupon code there. And make sure you follow The Tome Show on Twitter and Facebook for chances to win a bunch of great dice in the next few months. And then the contest will continue for a few months after that, all the way into September as well. So keep an eye out for what's coming up there. I also want to say thank you to all of our listeners who support us by shopping at Amazon or DM's Guild through the links at thetomeshow.com, or who become our patrons at patreon.com/thetomeshow. Just like some of our good friends and patrons, Jared Rasher, Steal Your Mind, who's in the chat right now, Scott Nagel, Hyperlexic, Merrick Blackman, Jill Sanders, Leonard Pelche, Doug Palmer, and so many others. I also want to thank our guests, Ismail Alvarez. Where can people go to find you if they want to chat with you some more about stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I am regularly on Twitter as one of those aforementioned social media personalities. Not Big Bridges though. And I am there as King Lorathorn or Elven Wizard King, whichever you find easier to spell. I also do 5th edition material. I write books and so on for Fat Goblin Games. So you can find me on DriveThruRPG if you look up 5th edition Fat Goblin Games. Or my name, Ismail Alvarez.
Excellent. And Jeremiah McCoy, if people want to chat with you some more, and why wouldn't they? Where would they go to do that?
So I have a website, jeremiahmccoy.com. I'm on Twitter as Tech Noir, and on TikTok, which I spend an inordinate amount of time on these days. I am Basics of the Game.
Nice. All right, and if you want to get a hold of the show and maybe let us know what you think of this format of we've only looked at this for a week, and we're going to do a really in-depth with people that have played it, in a few months format, you can get a hold of us in several ways. You can email thetomeshow@gmail.com. You can tweet me. I'm on Twitter as @Squatch, SQUACH. Tracy, who's not with us tonight, is Sarah Darkmagic, Sarah with an H. You can tweet the show is @TheTomeShow, and you should definitely be following it because there's chances right now this month to win fabulous prizes for doing something simple like retweeting something. And you can also follow us on Facebook, and we have a Discord channel. If you're interested in the Discord, make sure you let me know either through Twitter or the Facebook or the email address and whatever. I'll send you whatever the link is at the moment, and you can come join the great community there we have on Discord. And that is our first surprise round episode, this time about Theros, where we underwent an ordeal that was granted to us by a god. In this episode of The Tome. And that's how it ends. Hey,
Yay!
Thanks for joining me, Jeremiah and Ismail, and all of our people there in the chat on Twitch. I hope you had fun.
I had fun.
Likewise. Yeah, I certainly did.
Good.
You guys heard me well enough when I was talking, because I know I was getting choppy there for a second.
It tended to, you would talk and then it would get choppy for a little bit in between sort of each time you were talking, but we got most of it, so.
Yeah. I will confess that there were times where I was talking and I was like, I should stop talking and just throw to Ish.
And your veteran podcast hosting instincts kicked in, and you occasionally did that, like I would as a host. So,
I was like, "What do you have to say about this?"
I'm gonna say goodbye to the stream in a moment. So say goodbye to the folks in the stream for now. So thanks for joining us, guys.
Bye.